Today, we're diving into the mind of one of the most important and, honestly, one of the most contradictory figures in the whole liberal tradition, John Stuart Mill. He's a thinker whose ideas feel more relevant than ever, really because they're just so full of tension.
See, on one hand, you've got Mill the hero, the ultimate champion of liberty. This is the guy who gave us, arguably, the most powerful defense of free speech ever put to paper. But then, you have critics, like Ernest Barker, who called him the prophet of empty liberty, basically saying his ideas sound amazing in a book, but they just completely fall apart in the real world.
So that's the big question for us today. How can one person be both of these things at the same time? Is he a hero or is he a hypocrite? Well, what we're going to find out is that Mill's genius is actually found right there, inside that inconsistency. You see, Mill's contradictions aren't really a flaw in his thinking. They're a reflection of the time he was living in. He was a man caught in the middle, kind of standing with one foot in the old world of classical liberalism, limited government, individual rights, and the other foot in the brand new world of modern liberalism, which was just starting to grapple with ideas like social welfare and the common good. And this whole struggle, it kicks off with the very first philosophy he ever knew, utilitarianism, which he got from his mentor, Jeremy Bentham. Mill's goal was to defend it, but in trying to fix it, well, he might have just broken it completely. So Bentham's original idea was, you have to admit, beautifully simple. To figure out what's right or wrong, you just do the math. You add up all the pleasure an action creates, you subtract all the pain it causes, and whichever action has the highest score, that's the right one. It's all about the quantity of pleasure. And this quote just perfectly captures Bentham's whole point. He's basically saying that the simple joy you get from a silly kid's game is morally no different from the deep, complex pleasure you get from reading poetry. If the amount of pleasure is the same, it doesn't matter where it comes from. As you can imagine, this did not go over well. Critics immediately jumped on this, with one writer famously calling it a pig's philosophy. They argued that, hey, if all pleasure is equal, then what makes human life any better than a pig's? We're all just chasing the same basic satisfaction. And this is where Mill jumps in to defend his teacher. But the way he does it is a total game changer. He basically says, look, it's better to be a brilliant human being who's unhappy, like Socrates, than a happy fool. And it's definitely better to be a dissatisfied person than a satisfied pig. He's introducing a whole new idea here. He invents the idea of quality. He says there are lower pleasures, for the body, and then there are higher forms of happiness, for the soul. But in doing that, he accidentally blows up Bentham's whole system. Because how do you measure the quality of something? You can't. That simple pleasure calculator Bentham designed, it's now totally useless. And that's the great irony, isn't it? In his attempt to save the theory from its critics, Mill completely changed its DNA. It led people to say he was like Peter, who denied his master. He made the philosophy more human, sure, but he ripped out its original simple foundation. And this pattern of trying to save an idea by completely transforming it is going to be the story of his life. Okay, so let's see that pattern play out again in his most famous work on liberty. Here, Mill tries to lay down one simple absolute rule to protect every single one of us from the power of the government and, the pressure of society. At the very core of his argument is this incredibly fierce defense of free speech. For Mill, the moment you silence any opinion, no matter how much you hate it, you're basically saying, I am perfect, and I can never be wrong. You're claiming to be infallible, which, of course, no person can ever be. So to draw a clear line, he creates what's now called the harm principle. It's a simple little test. First you ask, does my action only affect me, what he calls self-regarding, or does it affect other people? If it only affects you, society can't say a thing. You are totally sovereign over your own mind and body. The state can only step in when your actions cause direct harm to somebody else. Sounds crystal clear, right? But here's the massive problem that people spotted right away. Can you think of any action that is truly only about yourself? I mean, if a person drinks themselves into ruin, doesn't that harm their family? Doesn't it harm their community that has to support them? That clean line gets real blurry real fast. And that's exactly what that critic, Ernest Barker, was talking about with empty liberty. By creating this principle that's so fuzzy and hard to apply, Mill accidentally created a giant loophole for the state. A government could just argue that pretty much any private choice you make has some kind of indirect effect on other people, and use that as an excuse to interfere, destroying the very freedom Mill was trying to protect. All right, let's pivot to another one of Mill's huge contradictions. The man was a massive champion of democracy in the 19th century, and yet he was deeply, deeply afraid of the very people he wanted to give power to. Mill was totally sold that representative government was the best system you could have. It was the only way to protect liberty and help people grow. But he was also haunted by this nightmare he called the tyranny of the majority. This fear that the uneducated masses would use their new power to crush minorities, silence anyone who disagreed with them, and basically grind all social progress to a halt. And to stop this from happening, he came up with some, well, pretty shocking proposals. Get this. He suggested that educated people and wealthy people should get more votes than poor working-class people. He wanted all voting to be done in public, not in secret. These are incredibly elitist ideas designed to put a brake on the very democracy he was fighting for. It's why people call him a reluctant Democrat. And this thinking wasn't just about class, it was global. He infamously argued that self-government wasn't for everybody, especially not for people in the colonies. For what he called barbarians, he actually thought a benevolent despotism, a nice dictatorship, was a better system. It's a pretty stark look at the very real limits of his own liberalism. So after hearing all that, you might be thinking, okay, this guy's a mess. Why should I care? But that's the thing. That would be a huge mistake. His contradictions are the very reason he is so incredibly important for us to wrestle with today. Think of Mill as a bridge. He's standing between two different worlds. He's got the ideas of 18th century classical liberalism in his head, but he's looking ahead and seeing the massive challenges that are going to define the 20th century. He was trying to figure out, how do we hold on to individual freedom in an age of mass democracy and growing calls for social justice? So you see, his inconsistency isn't a bug, it's a feature. It wasn't a failure of his logic. It was the honest, messy, and frankly brilliant struggle of a great mind trying to solve the hardest problems that any free society will ever face. His books aren't a rule book, they're a conversation. And that is Mill's real legacy. He didn't give us perfect, neat answers. He gave us the right questions. Questions that every single democracy is still struggling with right now. And he wasn't afraid to ask them, becoming the first major male philosopher to write a whole book about ending the subjection of women, taking his principles into places very few men of his time dared to go. Which really leaves us with one last thing to think about. We're living in an age of social media mobs, political echo chambers, and intense pressure to conform. In a world like this, isn't Mill's radical, passionate defense of hearing out even the most unpopular, most offensive opinions not just relevant, but maybe more vital than it has ever been?